What I want to kind of do, go back to this for a second, and I got until 2, right? Around? Put your hands up when I'm getting close, see where we are. Before going forward, I just want to ask people, do people kind of see the mirroring kind of level that's coming through on this? Do you have a little bit of an idea of where I'm going with this and how we get it done? Does anyone have any questions about that? What I'm really talking about here is about what in your lives now would change if all of a sudden you're a reporter and you're kind of getting this out. What do you need to look at, or what might be seen as important from the world of journalism to make your story a great story that'll be picked up in the media, or can be told, or can be written about in some ways? What are the things that people think about? I'm not trying to say that they're the right things. I'm not trying to make an argument that this is the way things should be. I'm trying to sensitize you to a few little different things. If we go to journalism theory then, we talk a little bit about what it would tell you would be most important. I'll just take a little bit of a tour through that to kind of give you guys a sense of how it might be there. What's a science journalist's role? What should we be doing? Entertaining, informing as we heard, having some fun as we did it, that would get people in there, educating them, all these other things. Well, if we have scientific knowledge, and we believe, as most journalists do, in a form of democracy, a form of place where people will have access to this knowledge and have the ability to understand it and use it to make choices about their lives. If we believe in that, which is the difference potentially between studying journalism and communications, then we need to think about how we're going to move that information through. How's the best way, theoretically, to get that knowledge, which is esoteric in many ways, hard to understand for many people, might be really understandable to some, but not to others. Even people within similar fields might have trouble at times grasping exactly what that person's out there. There's theory and there's practice. Most journalism theory would say the purpose should be that you're trying to give people the information they need to be free and self-governed, to make their own choices. Trying to give them enough information so they know what to do with the information you're giving them in many ways. That's what it's suggesting you probably should be doing. But much of the criticism we heard is anecdotal. They don't have good responses to what the role of the science journalist could be. This is something when you go on to communicate your research, you're going to have to, in some ways, choose for yourself. It's going to define what type of communicator you become. It's going to define what you see as the story within that, which I'll get to in a few practical tips at the end as I speed up a little bit here, because I can see some people waning already in the theory side. I'll go quicker, don't worry. We'll get going. All right, so how does someone interpret science? There's factual questions we might not know about when we try to communicate our science to someone. How do people understand science stories? How would they take the Ozzy Osbourne story and understand it and try to grapple with it? We don't always have good answers to what people do with science communication, do with it when it's out there. Who influences that communication? Was it the fact that this was just a big PR type thing, a terrible story in the sense of all the company was trying to do was get its name out there. All they cared about it is that it said cofactor genomics in the top 3 paragraphs, and they're using Ozzy Osbourne as a way to do that. Or was there a real scientific question out there that the scientists were trying to push, and Ozzy really does have an interesting genome? There really is something interesting about how he could do that much drugs and live. How the hell did that happen? Why is he like that? Which of those was it, and who's influencing it? Is there a real scientific question there, something that needs to be answered and we need to hear about because, oh my God, if I, had some gene therapy, I could be like Ozzy and do all the drugs I wanted to. Or what future you're imagining, you know what I mean? Like, what is it out of there that's actually valuable to someone in some ways? And who influences the communication of that? Then there's questions about what's the aim of that. Who should it serve? Should it serve the company? Should it serve the journalist? Should it serve Ozzy? Should it serve us as readers, students, people talking in a classroom? What are the best approaches to kind of putting that forward? And how does it fit into a broader idea of what the ethic of this journalism should be? And the broader goals of what we think ourselves science should look like, society should look like, and the interface between the two should be. Some people would say, theoretically, this is what a lot of the news, the Ozzy story, things you'd pick up in the newspaper will be. It's really an exchange model. There's science, it's this thing that exists, it's pulled out of the air, we learn about it, we get some data. It's fixed and certain, we believe in it, we think it's something that we know about the world. It comes from scientists, people who are experts and people we believe in, have some respect for, think are doing a good job. There's the public that needs on some level to know a little bit about this for, let's say, to make a decision about whether or not they would want to eat genetically modified salmon when it appears on our shelves in probably 6 months. Do we want to eat it or don't we? We need to know a little bit about that to decide what the ramifications are. And some people would say there's a vacuum between those two. And really what you do want to do is exchange information between them. And you put the press in the middle of the two. Yeah?
When you say press, do you mean like newspapers and mass media, or do you mean trade magazines, journals, technical?
I'm tending to talk today about news media and the mass media in some ways. Technical journals a little bit less, although that'll go in there, and I've written for some. In this case, of the exchange model, they're really talking about what used to be called the mass media, and whether or not that exists anymore is an open question on some level. But they would talk typically about press gallery reporters. So people like Peter Calamai, who's now retired, Margaret Monroe for Canada West News Service, the science reporters that if you read the paper and learn about science, there's about 6 of them left in Canada. 30 years ago, there was about 45, so you can see where the world is going in terms of journalists that do this kind of work. Yes, so that's the thing in there. So take that in that frame. This is a really good point, because there's a bunch of different things we're not talking about, right? There's a bunch of things we don't have time today to go into that I think is really interesting, how blogs affect this, how scientists communicating without the press do this, because now, obviously, you don't need to put that press bubble in there, you can put a lot of bubbles. So what I'm talking about is the classical model, what they would have talked about 30 years ago. That's the question? Cool, awesome. So this is the classical model, that if you're thinking about communicating your science, you're going off after today to write something out, the idea would be that you take your science, you figure out ways to translate it through the vacuum so that people understand it. The limits of it, is it enough? Well, often what happens when you're doing this, and we think back to the Ozzy Osbourne stuff, is that the plugin is an emotive transmission. It's assuming, in this kind of a model, that people won't really have the ability to understand what you're about to tell them. It's pretty much not going to happen. Not easily, at least. Some might, but most won't. So the way you broach that is you communicate emotionally. You attract people by Ozzy Osbournes. You attract people by things that will really deal with things that in their life will connect to their emotions, things that you think might get them to read further and try to do the hard work that would understand science. And of course, traditionally, mass media, 30 years ago, things have changed a little. There's problems with that. Treat science as established fact, when it may or may not be in some ways, or whether or not it ever is a discussion we'll leave for today. Places journalism in the role of press agent. It really sees journalism as someone that's subsidiary to the science and public that is there to help. They're there to get the science out through it. It dismisses how newsrooms select and interpret facts. What I was telling you about, that I would take snack judgments. I'd cover one person's presentation and leave the other 50 to not be covered within 3 seconds of deciding. Now, some would say that I had a skill to understand what was important, what people didn't know. Other people would say I was just making a judgment, just a guess call, that people might do it in there. It assumes the public to be passive, that they're not going to actively engage, that they're not going to comment and blog about this and try to learn these things themselves. But instead, they need help. They need to push along to kind of get this done. And the problem, the last one, and this is the one you're getting at, that the idea of a vacuum is never absolute, right? In today's world, we're better off talking about a glut of voices, so many that we don't even know which ones to listen to, than a vacuum when nothing exists. So we're actually really in a different kind of space. But you can put a glut there instead of a vacuum and get it in there. Is there another way to think about this? Well, let's say we put this up. We treat science as uncertain. We might have certain things that we know, but there's also a lot of things that aren't done. There's more experiments to be done. There's caveat that's done. It's a social construction. Your science looks the way it looks because you did it. And I learned this very early in my PhD. If the person beside me would have done it, our papers would have looked entirely different than me. I could pipette and set up a slide, but I couldn't do the kind of stuff that he was doing with the computer and computer science and the data analysis. So we worked together, trying to fill some of those gaps. But it really was a function of who I am, what I was good at. That's the data I got. That there is a social element to how science is created. As much as there might be a reality, because I'm not saying nature doesn't exist, or are we even here in this room, I don't believe in any of that. There is a reality out there that I believe, at least, that exists, but I also think I influence it in the choices I make to do one experiment or not. That I didn't go back and change the buffer 80 times because I was just so annoyed with it. I was going to screw that, I'm doing a different kind of experiment. I'm going to try to get it from another way. And that choice changed what I ultimately gave to the world in some ways. But there's also other people talking about it. There's governments, there's public relations, there's scientists, there's the public, which can also be stuck up here. There's journalists, who I'm talking about, that are involved in this, that have tried very hard over their lives to get good at communicating so that they could get the good stories, or what they feel is the good stories, out there. It's really worried about people engaging with science and learning about it, and less worried about educating them or filling a vacuum in many ways. But how do you use that? How do you actually go forward and do something like that? There would be tiers if you wanted to avoid the old style. There would be 4 things that I would suggest you'd want to do to communicate your science. And the first one, you want to be right. You want to be factual. You want to merge fact with theory, get a diversity of views. You want to land between misleading simplicity and bewildering complexity. You want to get somewhere in there. Next, you want to have context to the thing you're writing. You want to be creative, thought-provoking, give some uncertainty and history to the project. Engages but is aware of the manipulation that might be going under, is aware that cofactor genomics is really just using Ozzy Osbourne as a way to get his PR out there, and that Is there a real science story under that? And I can get around that to say, okay, yeah, sure, they're using this as a PR thing, but there is also something very interesting about his genome that it would be interesting to know about. Or is it just like, just choosing some celebrity off the street and deciding to go with it, and that should be really about the story. Like, what the hell's going on here in this day and age when we're just sequencing celebrities' genomes to get stock options to go up? Third one, under stress roles and implications. You would look at the ethical issues, the downsides, the impacts, the aims, the facilitator of these people being able to engage and do with it. And the fourth one, you'd be self-reflected. You know what you were trying to do by doing it. You wouldn't just communicate in the best way possible, but you think about it. And out of that, hopefully, on some level, the public would see that the reality of your science being communicated is a negotiation between many different factors that have to be put together. And you have some awareness of those. Try to control some of them and not others. That's the theory. It took a little bit longer than I wanted. But it would go something like this. If I was in my science reporting course and trying to get students that have no science background to understand and engage with scientific topics that are highly complex, and I tend to send them into the worst fields possible, theoretical physics, quantum mechanics. I send them out there dry, and I ask them to ask Nobel Prize winners why the hell their science should be listened to at all. So this is what we work on. This is what we work on, this cool, calm composure, to kind of see the theoretical side of a good story. It's factual, it has context, it shows the implications, and it's aware of what it's trying to do. All the time asking, how do we know that? How did I come to know what that is? And from that, and for myself as a writer, you put that then into clear, simple writing. So I want to shift just a little bit to talk about that. Some tips for finding a science story within. And here's where you actually might get some, hopefully the theory bounces around in the brain, you guys kind of take it and think about it. Might get some tips for thinking about this, and we'll try to go through this a little bit quickly. This is what some people would say, training a journalist, thinking about your own science is the most important. This is what should make it a story, this is what should get it in there. This is how you would translate the 4 theoretical steps into something, how you would choose if it belongs in there. Rosenberger and Miller are two of the people that are most famous for talking about this. They would first ask that, is your science reliable before you try to put it in there and try to make it done? Have you done a good job? You think you really believe what is coming forward? Is it reliable enough? Or as the journalist from the outside, can I find some way to find out how reliable it really is? I might need some scientific knowledge to do that, or I might just have to implicitly trust the peer review system or other scientists to critique it for me in some ways. And it has fascination value. That you yourself can actually see that there's something in there that someone might go, whoa, that's pretty cool, you know, I never knew that. I never knew that could actually happen. There's some sort of value to it in terms of fascination. And remember, you don't need all of these, but a perfect story might have them all. I've never written one, to be honest. If I get 3, I'm really happy. If I answer these questions to the left that relate to these, I'm very, very happy. And often I would sell a story because of that. There's importance in meaning. That's important to people. It'll affect a multitude of society. Or people that are reading that trade magazine that are really interested in aeronautical engineering and get that new technique to put little bumps into the metal so that it flies better. They're really interested in that. It has meaning to them. It has meaning to the whole society that is involved in that. And it's important. So that has that level to it. It reaches a threshold in the sense of there's enough people out there in the world that will like it, understand it, and get it there, that it will move forward through these daily news values as you're kind of thinking through. Then it has other values like timeliness, just got published, co-option. This is one that's really interesting and important for journalists because there was just a tornado. You write a story about tornadoes and how they work. So you're co-opting things that are out there. So if your science relates to something that people are talking about or interested in, you can co-opt that to tell your story in a way that's a little bit better, to get at what you think your goal is. There's continuity. It's a story that's always been going. We hear more and more about stem cells. We hear more and more about spinal cord regeneration. But finally, something seems to actually happen. But that story is always there, that continuity. And there's unexpectedness. Something new comes up. I often ask myself 3 questions I want to answer when I say, here's the science I had, sitting in that little room, the microscope, seeing the amoeba turn left when I put A onto it instead of B, and it turned right when I put B on there. Can I ask about that story? What was different? Or answer at least, ask and answer. What was different than what I knew before? Now I've learned this, what I used to know was that. There is something new here. I can actually say there's something new here. It's fundamental to my audience because, in this case for the scientist, we never knew that this would do that or would do that. Or it's a chemical that we're exposed into in our little earphones, and who knows what it's doing to the cells in our ears or whatever. Who knows? But there's something there that's fundamentally important. And the last one is the controversial one, but is it controversial in some way? And this is what news media people are going to be very interested in, not necessarily everyone. That's the last one.